I healing? Or am I just becoming bitter and closed off? Because this does not feel like the growth everyone keeps talking about. That is the question I hear more than almost any other, and I heard a version of it again last week from someone who left a narcissistic relationship 14 months ago and does not recognize the person she has become. She used to be the friend who forgave everything. Now she cannot sit through a dinner with small talk without wanting to leave the table. She used to apologize for having needs. Now she states them flatly without softening a single word. Her family has started saying she is different. Colder. Some of them whisper. And she came to me asking the only question that actually matters. Is this healing? Or is this just damage? Wearing a new face. I am not a therapist. I spent 12 years in hospice care, sitting with people in the last weeks of their lives. And what I learned there was not about dying. It was about what happens to a person when the mask finally cannot hold anymore. After my own divorce, a therapist handed me a book called Memories, Dreams, Reflections, written by a psychiatrist named Carl Jung, and something in it cracked open for me that I still have not fully closed. Jung spent his life studying exactly this moment, the moment when a person who survived something unbearable starts acting like a stranger to themselves. And he did not think it was damage. He had a name for it. He called it Enantiodromia, and once you understand what that word actually means, you will never look at your own so-called coldness the same way again. Here is what I want to give you today. 8 specific behaviors that empaths develop after surviving a narcissist. Behaviors that scare them. Behaviors that make the people around them uncomfortable. Behaviors nobody warned them about before they showed up. I am going to walk through each one, show you exactly where it comes from in Jung's own framework. And by the end, I am going to show you the one distinction that tells you, with total clarity, whether what you are experiencing is decay or arrival. No vague spiritual awakening language. Real psychological mechanism. Real sources. Real names. Before we get into it, do me a favor and hit like on this video. And if you have not already, subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps YouTube understand that this kind of content matters to people, and it tells the algorithm to put more of it in front of people who need to hear it. That is the only reason I ask. Here is the sentence I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video. The opposite that is emerging in you right now is not your destruction. It is your rebalancing. Let's start with the first behavior, because it is the one that gets survivors called cold more than any other. It is the sudden, sharp intolerance for small talk. Before the relationship, you could sit through anything. Weather conversations, office chatter, the kind of surface-level exchange that fills a room without ever touching anything real. You were good at it. You might have even enjoyed it. And now 30 seconds of it makes your skin crawl. You find yourself standing in a kitchen at a party, nodding at a story about someone's home renovation, and internally you are screaming to be anywhere else. On Reddit, in the r/HSP community, someone described it exactly like this. Small talk feels unbearable now. After seeing the mask of a narcissist up close, I crave deep, honest, soul-level connections. Anything less feels like a waste of my limited emotional energy. That phrase, the mask of a narcissist, is the key, because what you actually developed in that relationship was an involuntary, hyper-accurate radar for performance. You spent months, maybe years, watching someone perform a version of intimacy that was not real, warmth that evaporated the moment it stopped being useful, concern that was actually control, charm that was actually bait, and your nervous system, which is smarter than your conscious mind gives it credit for, learned to detect the gap between performance and substance in real time. So now, when someone gives you small talk, which is structurally a form of low-stakes social performance, some part of you flags it, not because small talk is evil. Most of the time it is just people being polite. But your radar cannot tell the difference anymore between polite performance and dangerous performance because it was calibrated in an emergency, not in a classroom. Jung would say you develop this discernment because the unconscious does not let extremity go unanswered. If you spent years unable to detect manipulation, the psyche does not just quietly recover. It overcorrects. It builds a filter so sensitive that even harmless surface talk sets it off. That overcorrection is not a flaw in the system. It is the system working exactly the way it is designed to work after trauma. And I will show you why that matters in a few minutes. The second behavior sits right next to the first, and it might be the one people around you find hardest to accept. Zero tolerance for disrespect and games. You used to be flexible. You used to give people the benefit of the doubt, again and again, past the point where it made sense. Someone was rude. You assumed they were having a bad day. Someone crossed a boundary. You told yourself you were probably overreacting. That flexibility felt like kindness. It was actually a habit built on the belief that your comfort mattered less than everyone else's. Then you lived inside a relationship where that flexibility got weaponized. Every time you forgave, the behavior got worse, not better. Every ultimatum you absorbed made room for the next one. And somewhere in that process, something in you reached its absolute limit and stayed there. On Quora, someone described the aftermath this way: I no longer tolerate lying, threats, ultimatums, or toxic behaviors. People say I have become cold, but I just cannot do it anymore. I want you to notice the phrase, I just cannot do it anymore. That is not a personality change. That is a nervous system that spent years absorbing damage, finally refusing to absorb any more of it. And here is the part that gets missed constantly. This is not you becoming harsh. This is you discovering for the first time where your line actually is. Most people who have never survived something like this do not know their own limit because they have never been pushed to it. You know yours now. That is not a scar. That is information. Hard-won, expensive, permanently useful information. I think about a woman I sat with in hospice care years ago, long before I had ever read a page of Jung. She was not dying from a narcissistic relationship. She was dying from cancer. But she told me something in her last weeks that I did not understand until much later. She said the year before her diagnosis, she had finally left a marriage that had quietly hollowed her out over 2 decades, and everyone around her called the woman she became afterward hard, sharp. Someone said, to her face, that she used to be so much softer. She told me, from a hospital bed, that softness had almost gotten her killed slowly, one accommodation at a time, and that the hardness everyone criticized was the first time in her adult life she had actually protected herself. I did not have language for that back then. I do now. What she lived through was Enantiodromia in its purest form, decades of one-sidedness resolving itself, late but completely. The third behavior is quieter, but it might be the one that scares people the most, a need for solitude that feels almost biological. Before, you could be around people constantly. You thrived on it, or at least you told yourself you did. Now you need hours, sometimes entire days of complete silence. And if you do not get them, something in your body starts to fray. Someone on Quora put it in words that stuck with me. I need to be alone in a way I never did before. It is not depression. It is like my nervous system finally needs silence to regulate itself after years of walking on eggshells. That phrase, walking on eggshells, describes a state of continuous, low-grade vigilance. Your body was scanning constantly for the next mood shift, the next contradiction, the next test you did not know you were taking. That kind of vigilance runs on the same physiological system as a threat response, and threat responses are expensive. They burn resources the body needs for everything else: digestion, memory, emotional regulation, sleep. When the threat is finally gone, the body does not just relax on command. It has to actually discharge everything it was holding, and that process requires exactly what you are craving now: silence, stillness, and distance from stimulation. This is not isolation. Isolation is a retreat from life driven by fear. What you are describing is regulation, a nervous system doing maintenance it was never given the chance to do, and it is worth saying plainly, because I know some of you feel guilty about this exact thing. Needing quiet after years of chronic vigilance is not weakness. It is your body finally being allowed to finish a job it started a long time ago. Think about it, the way you would think about a smoke detector after an actual fire. Before the fire, the detector sits quiet, barely noticed, calibrated for an ordinary household. During the fire, it does not just chirp politely. It screams because the threat is real and immediate, and survival depends on the loudest possible signal. After the fire is out, that same detector does not instantly recalibrate to its old, gentle sensitivity. For a while, it goes off at burnt toast, at steam from a shower, at anything that even resembles smoke. That oversensitivity is not the detector malfunctioning. It is the detector doing exactly what it was built to do after being taught, in the most direct way possible, that the stakes are real. Your nervous system's need for silence right now is the same thing. It is not broken. It is a smoke detector that lived through an actual fire, still ringing a little too easily, because it has not yet been convinced the danger is fully gone. Now here is where I need to slow down, because this next part is the piece that actually explains everything you have heard so far. The small talk intolerance, the zero tolerance for games, the need for silence. All three of them look like separate personality shifts. They are not. They are three expressions of the exact same underlying mechanism. And to understand that mechanism, we need to go back almost exactly 105 years to 1921 to a book Carl Jung published called Psychological Types. In that book, Jung introduced a concept he called Enantiodromia, a Greek term he borrowed and repurposed, meaning, roughly, running toward the opposite. His definition, and I want to give you this precisely because the wording matters. Enantiodromia is the emergence of the unconscious opposite in the course of time. Jung observed something specific in the patients he treated in Zurich in the early 1900s. When a person's conscious attitude becomes extremely one-sided, when they spend years leaning entirely in one direction, whether that is endless giving, endless tolerance, endless self-silencing, the unconscious does not stay passive. It builds pressure, and eventually, that pressure breaks through as a compensatory swing in the opposite direction. Not gradual, not gentle, often sudden and often unsettling to the person experiencing it, because it does not feel chosen. It feels like something is happening to them. This is not vague. This is not a metaphor. Jung watched this pattern play out across dozens of case histories, people whose personalities appeared to invert almost overnight after a period of extreme imbalance. And what you are living through right now, if you survived a narcissist, is a textbook example. For months or years, you existed in radical one-sidedness. You gave without receiving. You tolerated without limit. You silenced your own needs to keep the peace. That is about as extreme and one-directional as a psychological stance can get. Jung would tell you, without hesitation, that the unconscious was never going to let that stand. It was always going to compensate. And the compensation was never going to be subtle, because the original imbalance was not subtle either. That is why the intolerance for small talk feels so sharp. That is why the zero tolerance for disrespect feels so absolute. That is why the need for solitude feels almost involuntary. These are not random symptoms. They are the precise, mirror image opposite of the one-sidedness you lived inside for years. And the sharper the original imbalance, the sharper the swing back. Enantiodromia does not do moderate, it does correction at the exact scale of what needed correcting. And once you see this pattern, you start noticing it works like a lever. On one side, you have years of overgiving. On the other side, a sudden, almost fierce protectiveness over your own energy. On one side, years of accepting bad treatment. On the other, an inability to accept even minor disrespect. It is the same psyche, the same person. just no longer willing to stay pinned to one extreme. Let's keep going, because there are 5 more behaviors, and each one maps onto this same mechanism in a different way. The 4th behavior is one that survivors often describe with genuine fear in their voice. They start seeing narcissism everywhere, in friends, in coworkers, in family members who have done nothing wrong. On the r/narcissistic abuse forum, one person wrote, "I start seeing narcissism everywhere now, in friends, coworkers, family. It makes me distrustful of new connections. Sometimes I even question if I am the narcissist for setting boundaries." That last sentence is heartbreaking because it shows how deep the confusion runs. Here is the mechanism. Your brain built an extremely detailed internal map of manipulation tactics. Not because you wanted to, but because survival required it. Deflection, gaslighting, love bombing, triangulation. You learned to recognize these patterns the way a person who has been in a car accident learns to flinch at sudden movement. That pattern recognition does not have an off switch you can flip the moment the relationship ends. It stays active, scanning, because the danger it was built for felt existential. The uncomfortable truth is that this hypervigilance genuinely does produce false positives. Not everyone who disagrees with you is manipulating you. Not everyone who sets a boundary against you is a narcissist. But, and this is the part that gets erased in the clinical framing of this, the same mechanism that produces false positives also produces something enormously valuable. You now recognize real manipulation faster than almost anyone around you. The skill is not broken. It is uncalibrated, running a little hot, because it was forged in an emergency. That is a very different thing from being wrong. The 5th behavior. You stopped the reflexive habit of people-pleasing. You stopped over-explaining yourself. You stopped apologizing for having needs. One person on the Narcissistic Abuse Forum described it with a phrase I have not been able to shake. It feels alien, like I am wearing someone else's skin. I want to sit with that phrase for a second, because it captures something important. It does not feel alien because it is wrong. It feels alien because it is unfamiliar. You spent years, maybe your entire life before this relationship, operating from a persona built around accommodation. In Jung's framework, the persona is the mask we present to the social world, the adapted self we perform to stay safe and belonging. For many empaths, that persona was built in childhood, long before the narcissist ever entered the picture. The good child, the peacekeeper, the one who read the room before anyone else could get upset. The narcissist did not create that persona. The narcissist exploited an already existing one, and exploited it completely. When you stop over-explaining, stop apologizing for needs, stop performing agreeableness on demand, you are not becoming someone new. You are stepping out from behind a mask that was built for a much younger version of you, in circumstances that no longer apply. It feels alien because you have never lived without it. That does not mean it is not you. It might be the first time you have been fully you. The 6th behavior is the one that comes with the most guilt attached. Survivors feel guilty about their own need for solitude because the people around them read it as isolating, even as withdrawal. On Quora, someone wrote, "People think I am isolating, but I am rehabilitating. I do not fit into my old social circles anymore, and the energy I once spent on others is now redirected toward my own survival." I want you to notice the redirection in that sentence. Not gone. Redirected. That is an important distinction because it tells you this is not a permanent retreat from connection. It is a temporary, necessary reallocation of a finite resource that was, for years, being spent entirely on someone else's needs. You cannot build a self while simultaneously funding someone else's bottomless demand for your attention. The two are mutually exclusive, so the psyche does the only thing it can do. It pulls resources inward toward reconstruction, even when that reallocation looks from the outside like distance. The 7th behavior is the one people find most frightening in themselves, and it deserves real care. What one survivor on the r/CPTSD forum called becoming dark. She described it this way: "I went through a phase of becoming dark. I started to see the tactics used against me and repurposed that awareness as a tool for self-protection. It scared me because it felt like I was becoming the very thing I escaped. I remember the first time I recognized my own shadow, years ago, sitting alone in an apartment that still had half-empty boxes from the divorce. I had spent my entire career being the calm one, the steady one, the man who held other people's grief without ever setting down his own. And one night, reading Jung by lamplight because I could not sleep, I realized there was a part of me that was furious, genuinely, coldly furious, at every person who had ever needed me to be endlessly available. I was ashamed of that fury for a long time. I thought it made me a worse version of the compassionate man I believed myself to be. It took years of walking the Blue Ridge Mountains, turning that realization over and over, to understand that the fury was not a betrayal of my compassion. It was the missing half of it, the part of me that had never been allowed to say no. Once I let that half exist, the compassion that remained was not weaker. It was finally honest. This is where I want to bring in a psychoanalyst named Nathan Schwartz-Salant, who spent decades studying narcissistic character transformation in his 1982 book, Narcissism and Character Transformation. Schwartz-Salant argued that narcissistic trauma blocks the natural flow of psychic energy between the ego and what Jung called the self, the deeper organizing center of the whole personality. The energy gets trapped, fixated in defensive structures around what he called the false self, the performed protective persona built to survive an unsafe environment. Transformation, Schwartz-Salant wrote, happens specifically when a person confronts the wound directly and integrates the repressed, darker aspects of their own psyche, moving away from rigid defense and toward a more authentic relationship with the self. That is exactly what becoming dark is. It is not moral decay. It is the integration of what Jung called the shadow, the parts of yourself that are capable of sharpness, suspicion, even ruthlessness when protection requires it. You survived by learning tactics from someone who used them against you, and now that awareness lives inside you too. The difference, and this is the entire difference, is intention. The narcissist used those tactics to extract and control. You are using that same awareness purely to protect your own boundary. Same knowledge, opposite purpose. That is not becoming the narcissist. That is what Jung would call shadow integration. Taking a capacity you once feared in someone else and claiming it as a tool you now control rather than a threat that controls you. The eighth behavior brings all 7 of the others into focus because it is the deepest one, the quiet mourning for the person you used to be, carefree, trusting, jovial, as one survivor on r/narcissistic abuse put it. I do not recognize myself anymore. I mourn that version of me. This is the behavior underneath all the others, and I think it is the one nobody warns you about, because nobody tells you that healing involves grief for a self you are leaving behind. Not just grief for what the narcissist took from you. And here, I want to bring in a psychologist named James Hollis, who wrote a book in 1993 called The Middle Passage. From Misery to Meaning in Midlife. Hollis described how life crises force the collapse of what he called the provisional personality, the adaptive mask we build in the first half of life, the version of ourselves assembled to survive childhood and early adulthood, which eventually stops working. The misery that comes with that collapse, Hollis wrote, is not meaningless. It is a summons to consciousness, and he made a crucial distinction between authentic suffering, actually engaging with the crisis, letting it change you, and inauthentic suffering, which is avoiding it entirely. The carefree, trusting person you are mourning was not fake. She was real, but she was also, in Hollis's terms, provisional. Built before you knew what you now know, adapted to a world that had not yet shown you what it could do. You are allowed to grieve her completely and still recognize that the version of you standing here now, sharper and more discerning, is not a downgrade. She is what happens when the provisional self finally meets reality and has to become something sturdier. So let's zoom out, because there is a mechanism underneath every single one of these 8 behaviors, and it comes from the same 1916 essay where Jung laid out his entire theory of psychological change. It is called the transcendent function, published in what is now Volume 8 of his collected works. Jung described the transcendent function as the natural mechanism by which the psyche moves forward when it is caught between 2 opposites, the old self and a new possibility, the persona and the shadow, the person you were trained to be, and the person your survival is demanding you become. When the ego can hold that tension without collapsing into either extreme, without fully regressing to the old pattern, and without fully dissolving into the new one, something Jung called a third emerges. Not a compromise, a genuinely new position, a synthesis that could not have existed without the tension itself. Jung called this the vehicle of psychic change. It is, quite literally, his answer to how a person transforms without breaking. This is the frame that makes sense of everything. The intolerance for small talk, the zero tolerance for games, the need for solitude, the hypervigilance to narcissism, the end of people-pleasing, the guilt-laced withdrawal, the darker edge, the grief for who you were. None of these are separate malfunctions. They are the visible surface of one underlying process, the transcendent function doing its work, holding the tension between who you were trained to be and who your survival now requires, and slowly forging something new out of that friction. Here is the arithmetic that matters, and I want to lay it out plainly, because this is where the confusion usually lives. If you are the person who gave endlessly, tolerated everything, silenced your needs completely, and stayed hyper-attuned to everyone else's emotional state for years, that is total one-sidedness on one end of the scale. What Jung's model predicts, without exception, is that the compensation on the other end will be just as total. Total generosity produces total protectiveness. Total tolerance produces zero tolerance. Total attunement to others produces total need for solitude. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a personality disorder emerging. That is Enantiodromia, running exactly the way Jung documented it more than a century ago, and it explains why the swing feels so extreme, because the imbalance it is correcting was extreme too. I said earlier there is one distinction that tells you, with total clarity, whether what you are living through is decay or arrival, and I want to give it to you now, because it is the whole point of this video. Jung spent decades distinguishing between the persona and the self. The persona is the mask, adaptive, performative, built for approval and safety. The self, in Jung's model, is the deeper organizing center of the whole personality, the thing that is actually you underneath every mask you have ever worn. Damage narrows you. It shrinks your capacity, closes doors, makes the world smaller and more frightening in every direction. Integration does the opposite. It sharpens your discernment while widening your capacity for real connection. It closes the door on manipulation and opens the door wider on authenticity. If small talk repels you but depth still draws you in, that is not closure, that is refinement. If disrespect repels you but real intimacy still calls to you, that is not coldness, that is a boundary finally doing its job. Damage makes a person afraid of connection itself. Integration makes a person unwilling to accept counterfeit connection any longer. Those are not the same thing, even though from the outside, to someone who does not understand the mechanism, they can look identical. This is not just theory either. A psychologist named Stephen Joseph, in his 2011 book What Doesn't Kill Us? The New Psychology of Post-Traumatic Growth, documented that between 30 and 70% of trauma survivors report genuine positive personality change afterward. Strengthened relationships, a fundamentally shifted sense of what matters, the discovery of internal strengths they did not know they had. Joseph specifically challenged what he called the rubber ball model of resilience, the idea that healing means bouncing back to exactly who you were before. He proposed something he called root building instead, the idea that real recovery is not a return to the old self, but an anchoring into new values that did not exist in you before the crisis forced them into being. And critically, Joseph's research showed that growth and grief are not sequential. They coexist. You can be mourning the carefree person you used to be and simultaneously building something sturdier in the very same week, sometimes in the very same conversation. If you have made it this far, you are already in a smaller group than you probably realize. Most people who go through what you went through never get a framework for it. They just experience the small talk intolerance, the sudden boundaries, the need for silence, the flashes of darkness, and they either pathologize themselves quietly or numb the discomfort until it goes away. You are not doing that right now. You know where Enantiodromia comes from. You know what the transcendent function is holding. You know the difference between a persona collapsing and a self finally emerging. The only thing left is not more information. You already have that. It is trusting what you now understand enough to stop apologizing for the person these 8 behaviors are turning you into. That is exactly why I wanted to make this channel in the first place. A place to actually sit with Jung's work instead of skimming it for a quote and moving on. Every week, I go back into his collected works, into the case histories of the people he treated, into the writings of the analysts who carried his work forward, Marie-Louise von Franz, James Hillman, Edward Ettinger, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And I bring back what actually applies to what you are living through right now, not a repackaged inspirational quote. If any part of what I said today landed, the next video in this series goes further into what Jung called the shadow, and how the parts of yourself you are most afraid of are usually the ones doing the most protective work. Only a small percentage of people who go through a relationship like this ever get the language to understand what is happening to them afterward. Most just live it, confused, sometimes ashamed of their own reactions, without ever being told there is an actual psychological mechanism behind every single one of them. It is not because they lack intelligence, it is because nobody ever handed them the framework. You now have it. The only thing left standing between understanding this and living it fully is one thing: the willingness to stop explaining yourself to people who only knew the mask. I will leave you with this. The relationship that broke may have broken a version of you that was never built to last anyway, but there is a pact that nothing can break, because it does not depend on anyone else honoring it. The pact between who you are becoming and the self that has been waiting patiently underneath every persona you were ever forced to wear. Sit with that for a moment. Tell me in the comments, which of these 8 behaviors hit closest to home for you? And if you are living through one I did not mention today, tell me that too. I read every comment, and sometimes the ones you leave become the next video on this channel. I will be here. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.